All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking on WION at this hour, where the United States President Joe Biden will be celebrating the West's unity against the Russian invasion into Ukraine in his State of the Union speech. The ongoing crisis between Russia and Ukraine is likely to overshadow domestic politics. Now, excerpts released by the White House say that Biden will call Putin's actions as unprovoked war. Now, the annual State of the Union speech has a new focus this year. Typically, it's a chance for the American president to address domestic issues as well. But this year, Russian aggression against Ukraine is likely to occupy a large chunk of the president's address to the nation. Now, just hours before the address at a joint session of the Congress, Biden held a 30-minute phone call with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. And this was, of course, to discuss as to how the United States could further help in arming the Ukrainian military. Meanwhile, Biden is likely to also announce a ban on Russian carriers from American airspace. Canada and a number of other European Union nations have already closed their airspace to the Russian airlines and other aircrafts. The move came in response to the Russian invasion into Ukraine. Now remember, Volodymyr Zelensky is currently sheltering in Kiev. He has pleaded to stop the aggressor as soon as possible. Now, Putin has launched a full-scale invasion into Ukraine, and Americans are divided over Biden's role in the crisis. Some Republicans have blamed Biden for the Russian invasion into Ukraine. Some have, of course, praised him for determining a strategy to shame the Kremlin. During his speech, Biden is expected to touch upon how he rallied the world to put severe sanctions on Moscow. He's also likely to refer to his frequent warnings that the world's democracy are in a bit of an existential struggle. All right, so we expect the American president to speak in just a while from now. But before that, we are joined by our correspondent, Susan Tehrani, who is joining us live from New York. And we're also joined by a Voice of America correspondent, Chris Casquejo, who's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Chris, let me begin with you on this State of the Union address, which Joe Biden will be delivering in some time from now. Generally, the American presidents would spend a lot amount of time talking about their domestic issues, but this time around, Ukraine is likely to dominate the president's address.
That's correct. He will be talking a lot about Ukraine and how the U.S. has established a alliance of the Western military nations called NATO against Ukraine, against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And that is one of the things he's expected to highlight, but he's also expected to drive home the message to Americans that they're going to face some tough times with rising inflation and rising energy prices. Rising inflation is a top concern in the U.S.
Absolutely, indeed. Do stay on with this, Chris. Now, Susan, if I can bring you in on this. Now, this is a moment that is being described as possibly the most important moment in Joe Biden's presidency. And even as we speak, we are getting live visuals of the American legislators, of course, gathering, we're given to understand, in the House of the Legislature there as they come and take their seats to hear the president. And Susan, this of course is going to be the most significant moment of Joe Biden's presidency. Has the president got his strategy sorted in terms of how he intends to address not one, but many crises that face him?
Absolutely. This is a president that's giving his speech amidst the biggest, perhaps, international crisis since 9/11. No president of the United States has ever delivered a State of the Union address with such a large scale and consequential land war underway in Europe since 1945, and some say that at this point President Biden has to acknowledge the fact that he's perhaps a war president without being directly involved in a war. His policies and his strategy initially was to really focus on some of his achievements during the past 13 months. Albeit small, and perhaps lay a pathwork and groundwork for what's yet to come, in the year ahead. However, that strategy changed with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. As you mentioned, a lot of it will be focused on foreign policy. And, you know, some might say perhaps that might be better for this administration, considering the fact that, you know, not many Americans, only 29%, think that the nation is on the right track, and addressing a pessimistic public during a State of the Union perhaps will be easier said than done, and deviating public attention from what's happening here at home and his failures at home to a crisis overseas, although very catastrophic, might have been perhaps something that Joe Biden might have preferred to focus on largely than inflation, crime, mandates, upcoming midterms, so on and so forth.
Absolutely, indeed. Now, America, of course, sees itself as the leader of the free world, and in the past, it's always been front and center in many of these conflicts to try and halt Russia and formerly the Soviet Union in its steps. But this time round, many people would say that America has been fairly reluctant to push itself forth in combating Russia, especially even since the invasion began. What is the sense within Washington, Susan, in terms of how the American reaction has been to the Russian invasion into Ukraine?
Right, you know, during war times, and, you know, we take this with a grain of salt as we say, you know, President Biden is a wartime president. This is not America's war, but America is impacted and involved right now in many ways. Usually the public and both parties rally around the president. That really hasn't been the case with Joe Biden. While everyone agrees for the most part, their sentiments are clear regarding the Russian invasion against Ukraine. Some argue that perhaps this administration's strategies, one, were too little too late, two, they flip-flopped on the sanctions. Perhaps they should have been more hard-hitting from the beginning, used as a deterrent. And thirdly, I think right now at this point, you know, while the sanctions right now are being welcomed against Russia, and they will have an impact, notably those against the central bank, there's concern about America's position in oil and gas, and not targeting Russia's oil and gas sector is a huge cause for debate here. And many are saying that America, being the largest exporter of oil and gas, can do a lot more. And if Joe Biden and his administration's policies opens up that industry and that sector, America can help Europe. It has an upper hand, and then Russia will really be sidelined. And even, you know, there was a aid package that was supposed to be agreed on Capitol Hill between Republicans and Democrats. As President Biden was writing this speech, he couldn't come up with an agreement between the two sides, even members of his own party, to come up with this aid package, and it was bogged down in a partisan quarrel. What happened ultimately was that 60 million barrels of oil of the strategic petroleum reserves has been released to try to curtail these high gasoline prices that the Americans not only have been facing now, but as we mentioned, we will see higher gas prices moving forward because of the sanctions, and that's something that the president will be talking about. But yes, you know, this is supposed to be the State of the Union, to talk about unity among the American people, and the politics and politicians on Capitol Hill cannot be more, you know, in a sense of disunity at this point. I mean, he inherited a divided nation, but perhaps this unity at this point is a lot more than 13 months ago. Even within his own party, I mean, usually there is a rebuttal from a Republican side after the president's State of the Union. For President Biden, a Democrat is going to also rebuttal him, and then a second Democrat is also going to rebuttal his speech at the State of the Union, which is somewhat unprecedented. Usually you don't get someone from a member of their own party you know, talk about the president after his speech. It's usually from the opposing party. So here we are.
Absolutely, indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Susan Tehrani, for joining us from New York, and also Chris Casqueiro for joining us from Washington, D.C. and getting us all those updates. We expect the president to, of course, speak in a few minutes from now, and it'll be very interesting to see as to what the American president, of course, got to say to the nation. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.